Welcome back. In the last video, we talked about the document object model. And some of you might have a question, well, when you showed me window, it looked like an object. You have properties and methods, but whenever we access the DOM, the document, well, it doesn't look like the object, does it? It looks like HTML. And that is because web browsers just hide the fact that it's an object. They just give us a nice view like this, so we can play around with it better. But it is a JavaScript object. Now, with this document, we can use something called selectors to select different elements so we can manipulate them. So I'm going to show you a few of them today, the ones that are used most often that you'll encounter in your day-to-day web developer role. If you go to document, the first one I'm going to show you is get elements by tag name. As the name suggests, it accepts a tag name. In our case, if we look at our index.html file, well, I've created for you a shopping list. And if I minimize this, just so you can see it, we have a simple HTML file, and it looks like it's an important shopping list. It might be somebody's birthday and they're getting a notebook. All right. So with the tag name, I can say, well, what tag do I want to select? I want to select the H1 tag. I press enter, and look at that. I get the H1 tag. Okay, what else can I do? I can do document.get elements by class name. And here I can say, within the index file, I have class second, which is the second paragraph that says no excuses. So I can say second. And look at that. Now I have the second element. What else do we have? Get elements by ID. I think you can guess what this one's going to do. Document.get elements by ID. Again, we're going to select ID of, we see that there's a first here. So we can do first. And I get the ID. Now you see one difference here, that get element by ID doesn't have the plural S, right? Because you can only have one ID. It returns the full element versus what looks like an array. So in order for me to actually fully access the above, I'll have to do second and then access the 0 index of the array, in which case I get no excuses. All right, so these three are very, very useful, but there's something called query selector and query selector all, which are even better. Let's check them out. With document.querySelector, I can select anything inside here like I did with CSS. For example, if I wanted to select, or let's do, in this case, let's do H1. Well, I can select H1. If I wanted to select LI, our list items, I get LI, but it looks like I only get the first one, the notebook. What if I wanted to select all of them? And that is because query selector selects the first item that it finds. If I do query selector all, on the other hand, it selects all of them. And you see over here that we get all the 6 LI elements. Just to show you that it works with any CSS selectors, if I do LI and H1, well, I get the H1 and all the LIs as well. So it's very, very useful. The one caveat, as you know by now, is that whenever a new feature is introduced, we got to wait for all the browsers to implement it. So let's check can I use to see if query selector is in good standing. All right, it looks like all the browsers have implemented it, which is good. Let's check query selector all. All right, we get the go ahead. Everything's green. That's good. I want you to get used to that practice of making sure that whatever methods or properties you use, both for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, everything is working in the browsers. So I recommend that you use these two to do your selection because it's exactly like CSS. They're more powerful than the first three, but you will encounter these three every once in a while with the older code bases. Okay, what else can we do? We can see that we have get attribute and set attribute. Let's check it out. As the name suggests, if I do document get attribute, well, we see that there's nothing on the get attribute, is there? Because you need to select an element in order to get its attribute. Let me explain. So if I wanted to get the random 23 number from the first li, well, I would first have to select it. We can use something like query selector. And since it'll select the first one, I can say li, and I get it. But remember, we have to store it somewhere. So I could either give it to a variable and store it somewhere, or I can just directly say get attribute random. So we'll say I'll select the li, and from there, I'm going to get whatever attribute that is called random. And then I get 23. So get attribute can be anything. You can picture an image tag that has width and height, and you want to grab maybe the width and height to see what values they have. Well, you can do it with that. You can also set the attribute. So if I press up and I get the last command, I can now change get attribute to set attribute to now say random, which is the attribute that we want to grab and what we want to change it to. We can say we want to change it to 1000. Close the bracket, and I get undefined. But now if I select the query selector, the first li, I see that random has now been changed to 1000. Now you might be thinking to yourself, with this, can I add a class to maybe have a new style and change some CSS? Well, you absolutely can. That's one of the cool things with having the DOM is that you can change anything in your web browser. So let's try a few of those. You can use get attribute or set attribute, but I want to show you the more common way of doing this. The first way of changing your style is simply using the style tag. So for example, if I wanted to say query selector, if I want to say document.query selector, and we'll select the h1 tag, this h1 tag also has a style property, and all elements on the web page have a style property. And here is a whole bunch of stuff that we don't need to worry about. But what we can do is say style, and then dot, we want to access a property on the style, which is, well, our CSS style. So we know that we can have background. So background, we can say equals, what should we say? We'll say background equals yellow. But it has to be a string, right? So yellow, string, press enter. Look at that. We just changed our background. And you can do styles like this and change all of your styles. But there's one issue here. The issue is separation of concerns. We ideally don't want to include styles, which what we've done is essentially style equals background yellow. It's the exact same thing that we've done. So if I refresh here, you'll see that even though I haven't changed anything, I still have the yellow background. But as we remember, we want to have that separation of HTML focuses on the text, CSS focuses on the style, and JavaScript on the actions. So what's a better way for us to change styles other than style.property? Well, we have a few things that we can use. So let's start off with class name and class list. And I actually have a pretty cool style called cool title. So let's check that out. I want to remove this. Refresh. Yeah, so let's put the document query selector h1 in a variable so we don't have to keep doing this. So I'm going to say variable h1 equals, there you go. So now we have h1. We can say h1 dot class name equals, and we'll add cool title. Let's see what happens. Whoa, that's pretty cool, right? In case you're wondering how I did this, well, I just used this CSS, and the way that I found it is I looked at this CodePen. So if you search codepen.io, you can find a ton of cool things that people have built with CSS. And you can see that this was done by Rafael Castro. I just used his cool CSS for my h1 tag. And there you go. So I've added a new class to my h1. If I select my h1, you see that I have a class, cool title. Very nice. there's actually another thing we can do. We can do class list. So let's say that I wanted to add a class to li. We'll say document.querySelector. We'll do li, which will select the first one. And I want to say that here we want to look at class list. I see that, well, there's nothing because there's no classes. But if I add a class here, and let's do bold, red, and we don't need that comma. So now we have 2 class items. Well, if I save and redo this and refresh, I see that I have a list of classes. This class list gives us a few methods that we can use, such as add, remove, and toggle. So let's do that. Let's do the li, and I'm going to say class list add, and we'll add cool title. Look at that. But that kind of messes up our list. So let's remove the cool title and add a different one. So I'm going to say class list remove cool title. And instead, let's add another class that I have in my CSS, which is called done, that will give me a line through the text so that the to-do item is done. So if I do done, look at that. I have my first task on my shopping list done. But what if I made a mistake and I want to toggle it back? Well, instead of removing, I could just say toggle. And toggle again, and toggle, and toggle, and toggle. You see that this might be quite useful if you want to turn something on, off, back and forth. Very cool. What else do we have? Well, so far we've learned that we should use query selectors to grab the element and change the styles using something like class list. Let's make sure that class list is available in all browsers. Let's check class list. And it looks like we're getting green, but there's a few, such as IE11, that has partial support. So we want to be careful with using class list, so we might have to use some style tags in some areas. I have a few more that I would like to show you. One is inner HTML, and I have here dangerous. You'll see in some code bases, and this is why I want to show you this property, I can do something along the lines of document.selector h1. Now within this, I can say inner HTML equals, watch this, strong, exclamation marks, and then close the strong tag. And now if I press enter, look at that. I've just changed the inner HTML of h1 to have strong tags. Let's double check what h1 looks like now. h1 has strong tags with exclamation marks. All right, let's go back. We can also access something called parent element and children. So let's check that out. If I want to select Jello, document.query selector all, li, we'll select Jello, which is the second in the array. So that means 1, and I have Jello. So now I can say dot parent element, and I get the unordered list. And if I do the parent element of the parent element, I get the body. So I have Jello, I get the parent, which is the UL, and the parent of parent, which is the body. I can also do children. So if I do this, which is parent, which goes to body, and then children, I get all the children of the body. Very cool. The last point I want to show you is that it is really important to cache selectors in variables. What does that mean? Every time we do something like this, let's say we had a JavaScript file, and every time we're selecting new things whenever we want to use it. Well, this is using up memory because the computer has to remember, the browser has to remember that we want to select this, and then we're selecting again, and then we're selecting again, and we're selecting the same thing. So the web browser is doing actions over and over when all we had to do was variable h1 equals document.querySelector h1. So now anytime I need to use h1, the web browser doesn't have to go look up the DOM, find h1, and then store it in memory. We have h1 living until we refresh the page so that the web browser's work is done. It already told us where h1 is, and now we can use it. And that's called cache selectors. And it's something that we'll cover in the last video in this section where we talk about some developer fundamentals. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.